Wanderers, and welcome again for some easy eye viewing. What I want to go over today and spend the time doing is first off look through and get a little bit of celebration of the hobby efforts that went on at the most recent Out of the Basement event this past weekend. But I also want to use it as a discussion point from something that came up several times in the past, not necessarily just recently, but the whole idea of what constitutes a Best Presentation Award or a Best Painted Award at events. So to lay the groundworks, I guess, first thing to understand is this, it came from the Out of the Basement event, is something that we do as a club annually once per year at the beginning of January, and showcases a whole lots of different games over the course of a weekend. We did this year Age of Sigmar and Warhammer 40,000, Blood Bowl, Guild Ball, Malifaux, and for the first time, the Ninth Age. So, the Ninth Age community that comes out to this is, for the most part, I think, Warhammer veterans of the past that are coming back and still want to play with their toy soldiers in the rank and flank style. Although there are several new players, most of them are carrying over from other games. I can think of a handful, for example, that formerly played Warhammer 40,000 and got involved in that. But the one thing that I can say is that the hobby foo amongst these people is fantastic. Like, I mean, the amount of care and attention that they put into models and everything to do with the display of their army is over the top. It's fantastic. It's tremendous. Now, happy to be a part of that group, of course, because there's so much effort put in, and it really makes for a good display and a great gaming environment. But the thing that I want to turn the discussion into here as we go through and look at armies and stuff is a discussion that came up with a friend of mine several months ago, actually. And to tell you about him, he didn't participate in this, I should point out, but he formerly played in lots of tournaments, but of recent years has sort of fallen away from that and invested most of his time into really upping his painting game. So he's done all kinds of great stuff. He's the sort of guy that will do 9 to 12 layers of blending on belts and pouches on a model, for example. And as he sort of looks longingly at reinventing himself and coming back to playing in tournaments and events, he expressed to me that he'd be really upset if he came into an event with his painting technique and skill across a whole army and lose out to another army that just did something fancy with a big scary monster or, a freehand painted banner or something like that. Now, what that discussion led to is the merits of what constitutes what we used to think of as a Best Painting Award, but has really become a Best Presentation Award. So by the end of this video, the question that I'm going to pose to you folks is, what do you think deserves more merit? Raw painting skill and attention at an event such as this? Or is it something that's more of, did you do something flashy? Did you do something entertaining? Have you sold me on the character? Etc. Okay? Because certainly there's other aspects of it that do come into play here besides just how well you painted your model and whether I can see any blend lines or paint strokes. The discussion needs to go over into things like, did you do characterful bases? Is there visual interest to catch my eye? Are you telling a story with it and all that? So, over the last couple of years, what I'm flashing up to you on the screen here is a painting rubric that we used this weekend. This has been developed over a couple of years amongst a few people, but has really been refined and perfected by a fellow named Paul, who lives in a nearby city in Calgary. And he actually presents this to the players to do their own self-assessment, but we use it for judging because we go back over it afterwards and make sure that they're not making it up effectively, right? But this summarizes all of the things that can be encompassed into the idea of a Best Painted or Best Presentation Award. So the first section that we're going to look at is this section over here, and this is the one that talks all about the painting technicalities of things. Well, first off, we just look for completeness. I mean, the events that we do want to make sure that you have all your models painted to the fullest ability, or at least colored, right? Not necessarily painted to the fullest ability. I mean, that gets a lower score, I suppose. What I mean by this is there's lots of us that have armies where we have kind of cut some corners or rushed a little bit to get them done. either for this event that we had this weekend or maybe for a past event that you haven't gone back and brought them up to snuff with the rest of your army. So there's obviously a scale and score there. The other thing, of course, that we're going to look at is cleanliness, right? So we want to make sure the colors are tidy, they're in the right place, they're not slopping over or dry brushing, carrying over on places they shouldn't be. That's all pretty straightforward. Of course, the other thing that we're looking for is things like hand-painted details and extras that go onto a model. On these skinks, for example, we might look to make sure that you did little scales and delineated those things. Anything else that stands out, jewels, skulls, you name it. There's a myriad of things. Of course, other really important things that we look at is the blending that you do on these things. Everything should have a couple layers of highlights because they're miniatures and flat colors plain don't look flat. So putting that extra effort in to do that has great value, of course. And finally, we were looking for things that are over and above and being artistic. Okay, so checkerboard pennants like you're looking at here, extra details that you might paint onto the tabards of your horses, on shield emblazons, tattoos, whatever it may be. So those are all the levels of painting technicality that we look for. Now that constitutes, in our painting rubric that we've adopted, about 75% of your score. Okay. The other things that we talked about earlier, though, that have some value, and we'll go back and look at this for a second, is the basing of models. Right. So here we're looking at this section right there. First off, all we're asking is that things have some basing material on them, so that they look like they're in an environment that you expect them to be in. So in these ogres examples, they're on some melting snow area, rocky ground, dark, etc. Putting extra layers of texture on there, whether it be stones or foliage, trees, bracken, that gets you some extra. If you go full on like this guy and go to the aquarium store and put lots of aquarium plants, obviously that adds relief and adds visual capture to what you're looking at. But again, here we're looking for extra character, and let's take this little thing for example, where you have the dead cart as a unit filler, and he's got all these runic bases going on. So those are the kind of things that get extra points in the basing category. Moving on then, the last thing that's certainly an important aspect of the hobby and is enjoyable by many is the old idea of conversions. This is something that is obviously as subjective as the rest, but it certainly deserves merit and it deserves reward, because sometimes it can take as much time as anything else to be creative and create something new out of it. So for example, we might think about just simple weapon swaps where you put a different sword on a guy and to replace it, replace his axe that he had in the first place, or put heads from different kits onto other models, etc., etc. Those are the kinds of things that we consider as sort of simple ones. Very often in the basing is where we can see a lot of conversions, right? So, for example, he's got these gnarly trees amongst his units, and created something new out of that as a visual interest. And we might do other things like, put a back banner on a guy, like he's done right here. The other things that we're looking for is, at the highest level of things, is to do some of your own sculpting and creation of new things entirely, right? Where that might be in building up your basing, that you've done some sculpting of, in this case, stones and rocks and all those kinds of things. But that's a really vital part of it too. Now, the other thing that we want to talk about lastly is the display base. So obviously this fella has put lots of effort into creating his little ziggurat for his slan to ride on, and he's carried over onto the basing of his models to tie that all in. The visual interest that this adds when you see it in its own encapsulated space really adds to something, and we use that in the painting rubric too to give a bonus point sort of thing. Now, I'll admit to you that we do treat it at the moment as a bonus point thing. It's not a required thing to get full points. You could get full points without doing a modeling base, but if you fall short in some other categories, this is the extra thing that you could do to make up for it. So, as we go through these last couple snapshots, these are getting to the finalists actually. The one that you're looking at right now was our third runner-up in the painting competition. And I don't know that the tightness and the lighting is really going to do justice to delineate all of the aspects that we talked about earlier and thought of. This was our runner-up to it. So here's a guy that incorporated lots of conversions, and you can see the characterful things that he's brought up in his army, like this fella here. He's done a mixture of different characters and models to really dress up the categories. Extra stuff on his Gorgons, for example. And the paint job is great. The blending is good, etc., etc. He checks most of the boxes, including doing things like banner detail, like here and elsewhere, using models for different things. And then we're going to go to our eventual champion here. And again, I apologize for my photography and the lighting that was in this room. But again, Mike, who was the winner of this, and I'll give him his due credit, spent hours and hours on this kind of stuff, and he did extra detailing and on pennants and shields and banners. Plopped it into a rather simplistic display board, but characterful and appropriate for the army itself. So, having looked through all that, I guess in closing, I want to pose you the question. When we look at the value of the different aspects of the hobby, so as I said, with our painting rubric, about 75% of the value goes into all the aspects of raw painting, I'll call it. And then we have 25% split between doing conversions and basing, and a little bit of room for you to display base so that you can add character. So the question comes back to the discussion that my friend Scott and I had in the first place is, if you're going to come to an event and you are the best raw painter there, clearly, does that give you the best presentation award? Or can you be, and is it reasonable to expect that your raw painting skill can be overcome by all these extras that are also aspects of the hobby as a whole? So I'd really like to hear your opinions about this. Please use the comments below to tell me what your thoughts are, whether you think it should be a shift to one side or the other, or even if you want to talk about the painting rubric that we use here, and is that percentage of 75 to 25, is that appropriate? It should be very different. So please pipe in. Let's hear what you think. And if you're anywhere near the Alberta neighborhood, I guess I'll close by saying we're going to do this again in January. And if you're a 9th Age player, certainly should try to come and join us and show off your hobby foo as well. We'll get you involved. Okay, good day.